welcome everybody, and I'm sure some other guests will join us as we are moving along. It's my absolute pleasure today to welcome Ingra Du Buisson-Narsai with her book Fight, Flight, or Flourish, How Neuroscience Can Unlock Human Potential. I think we're all fascinated by this topic, and I think we've got an expert in our midst. I've read your book. It is really a thorough exploration of a fascinating topic with a lot of kind of little things that you're putting together, and you've put an amazing macro structure to it. So Ingra, you'll take us through what we do, but I kind of just want to hit off and just ask, in your book you talk about something called neurocapital. It was the first time I heard about this idea. So tell us more about what it is, and where do I get some?
So first of all, I think neurocapital sounds like a punchy payoff line, but I can't say it's a theoretical model or empirical model that we are happy to publish, but it really talks about what drives psychological capital in the world of work. And I think so psychological capital, it's explained that. So hope, trust, and all the positive traits that are well researched. We know it works if we apply it properly. But increasingly, I think, human behavior, we want to understand what sits behind it. And neurocapital is then what we would like to say, what sits underneath and alongside psychological capital, that we can understand human behavior from a neurobiological perspective as well. So, and like capital, it's a balance sheet. So, that's it.
Okay, so and maybe just to touch on that, then I understand balance sheets very well. See, how what's on the one side and what's on the other side? What balances it?
Yeah, so I think the big thing is, there's so many words in neuroscience, but it's literally, what we put in and what we exert, and how we replace. So I think we find in the corporate world, the culture is definitely to exert, and we're not often attuned with replacing. So, it's a very age-old analogy and article, actually, the corporate athlete, but I think the neuroscience is just giving such hard evidence and ways to make the balance sheet more positive, and that that you're not always in the red, but in the black as well.
Wow, very good. I like it when it becomes profitable. Okay. So Ingra, I believe that you've got some slides that you'll take us through. So just for everybody that's joining us, the Executive Book Club is obviously an opportunity where we read for you, and also where possible we bring in authors, people like Ingra, that takes us on the journey of understanding what this book is about. She obviously wants to sell more books. We want to invite you to our neuroscience course. But ultimately it's not about that. It's about learning and also spending time exploring new ideas and really getting a sense of it. So Ingra, I'm going to be in your hands, and also people are welcome to ask questions. On the left hand side there's a public chat on your screen, and I'll pick up on the questions, and every once in a while make a witty and sharp comment, or ask a question of my own. So please, Ingra, we have to listen to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to take you on a fast train through applied organizational neuroscience, people. But first of all, thank you for the opportunity. I'm an old Marty, and I think for me this is a wonderful opportunity. I mean, to speak on this forum. So, and a proud inhabitant of Seruria in 1988, I'd like you to know. So, good. So let's get going. So book club, I called it Flourishing Amidst Crisis, Insights from the Positive Neurosciences. And that payoff, that payoff line, but I got it from Harvard Business Review, and I think it's so important for us. So this is a book, but so now how do we apply this book as we sit in our chairs today? And I like that quote that I got there from Harvard Business Review. I'll read it. For a leader, a crisis can be the most finest hour and the darkest day. Teams, we in the corporate world that have teams and people, and our family members will remember our actions and decisions, good and bad, for years to come. So why did I start with that? Because I really I know that neuroscience can give us some tools and a finer slice into make it one of our best hours, or not always dark. Let's rather be honest with ourselves. Okay, so Flourishing. So the title of this book is called Fight, Flight, or Flourish. And I've got I got the title from it's a punchy payoff line, make no mistake. I think the whole theory of fight, flight, or freeze is highly contested increasingly. But flourishing, the concept of flourishing comes from positive psychology and Martin Seligman's work. And why I love that, I mean, so I've taken some poetic license, as you can see. And I think right from the start, some days can be great and some can be daunting. But flourishing is a choice. So the hashtag through this book, and as we take the body of work to market, we call it hashtag Choose Flourish. And it's about, I think Jean-Paul Sartre said, we are our choices. So, as hard as it may seem, there's work to be done. So I won't go into the definition. It's there. The opposite is languishing. And then it's an upward spiral of building and broadening positive emotions. So it's not a Damascus experience like we know, and then you're flourishing. It's you have to fight the thinking of helplessness, which is a lot of us probably know is learned helplessness, and fostering mastery and a propensity for expressing the positive. And there's a method to it.
So your basic premise is that I can choose to flourish. Okay.
Yes.
And I must choose to flourish.
You must. I think the scoreboard is clear, and there's a method to it. I think often, what we create our own methods, or we fall back on habits that don't serve us. But in flourishing, there's a habit. There's a habit to be developed.
Oh, okay. Stunning. I love that idea. That it is a choice, and that you can choose to flourish. I think that many times people choose not to flourish, and that also comes through in terms of what you're saying with specifically the bad habits that we choose sometimes.
Yeah, and I think especially Rian and COVID, I mean, I think we've really realized, so what is the formula to literally just stay on top, well, to make it to the next day some days? Yeah. And what is the formula to stay on top of the curve? And as the religious text says, there's nothing new under the sun, but we do know that there's a routine. If we have good daily routines, the probability of us doing well in life is higher. So embrace that. And neuroscience helps us see that, and obviously in research, but in the application of it, yeah.
Okay, great, excellent.
So I just wanted to check in. So with flourishing. So flourishing is as we said, is a huge construct and a huge body of work. But people that flourish, as I've just said, they do the following: they face the facts as it is. They find their focus and they flex then. Flexing means, it's not just I deploy it. It's a stretch. I know it's the truth and I push towards getting the benefits on that neurocapital balance sheet. So the context at the moment in flourishing, we say facing the facts. So what is so difficult for us at the moment is that this reset to the low-touch economy, so from high-tech, high-touch, to high tech and low touch has been tough. I think in terms of context, I think that we all wonder, are we in a failed state, and violence against women and all of those things, maybe a dual pandemic that we're facing lately. So how do we flourish as leaders? And so that face the facts in the context, and then know that this it's many kind of change cycles, but this thing of that there's emergency actions and regression to past behaviors, and then recovery. And this is where I think flourishing and embracing the body of work and the recipe for it can have immediate payoffs for decision makers.
Interesting. So you talk about finding that focus. Where does one start looking for that? Because that's I think that's the hard part. We all know that the facts are there, and that we can face them. But how do you inspire yourself enough to find focus in that? Because I think during COVID, everybody kind of had the joy of the experience of isolation, if there is such a thing. But at some point in time now, we need to understand that there is. I read the other day that the concept of new normal now appears more than 3 billion times on the internet. Google searches, and this new normal will not be the old normal. Does that relate to kind of that upward spiral, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think the big thing that we can learn from this field of applied neuroscience, to answer you indirectly, is that you know what, human behavior and psychology, we would like to say, we talk about finding our focus, and I suppose another one that's, I haven't searched it, but quite a few high hitters would be, you know, that work-life balance is gone and it needs to be reconfigured or whatever. Yes, but I mean, I think what brings us to finding focus is to know what we mean by focus in terms of conduct, behavior. So it's not that our you know, work-life balance has been disturbed. What we find that, and as humans, we've got 4 psychological needs. So it's Maslow, you know, it's another version of highly researched version of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. As that humans, we've got a need to belong. So under COVID, our social distancing, you know, we know it's been eroded or violated, this need to belong. Control, which talks into you know, finding your focus. The brain is a prediction pattern-seeking device, and at the moment it's a scramble. We don't know really where we're going. We don't have the tools to lean on from before in terms of what works and what doesn't. So that's where the whole thing of, you know, disorientation, and I wrote it on the right-hand side, even disorder comes from. There's a disorder being proclamated in the DSM-5 manual called COVID-19 potential disorder. So focus then comes in to understand those 4 needs that I only spoke to 2 now, and then to know how do you kind of readjust that you make sure that those 4 basic needs are met. And to answer you directly, to cut through a lot of the stuff, we find that the highest prediction, so the highest effect size, the smallest control with the highest effect size is people that have mindfulness and have a life purpose. It's called, well, in main neuroscience, goal-directedness. So that's how you find your focus, is to know what is it that you are, you know, that it sounds very colloquial, but what are you inspired by? What is your highest values in a company, which we're very good at, and to adapt to the changing world. And as a leader, to find that leadership purpose. And that taps huge into existential psychology and existential neuroscience. What am I here to do? If you know, I still have something important left to do.
Very interesting. And so you, I see that you're touching on the idea that we've had to learn a new pleasure, which is hand washing, before we all reach actualization. I like that that progression.
Yeah, and it's almost that thing of it's almost that thing that you know what, the pleasures of life we now needs to reinvent. And what is that? I mean, and actualization, the blurring of roles. We know, you know, when we just come out of Women's Month, and for women, this actualization has been a roller coaster. Well, I mean, I'm generalizing, but the women, a blurring of roles, domestic versus corporate roles. Where does one start? Where does the other one beginning? So it's a huge knock on. You know, this is what I want to achieve with my life, but this is what I'm forced to deal with at the moment. And how do I then still actualize myself within this, well, new normal?
Yeah, absolutely. So I found it interesting that in the book you talk a lot about the social patterns that we fall into, having evolved from kind of a very primitive state in our brain, where we've come from a place which obviously it was more effective for a small group of people to hunt together, to plant together, and systemically that has developed a type of kind of neural pattern in terms of socializing. Am I understanding it right? And how does that play out in the way that we kind of play out with each other, and kind of also maybe not to load the question too much. I love this thing that we need to learn to write a T-Rex, and it links to the primitive patterns. Tell us about that.
Okay, so it's a, you know, I think in the corporate world I like that analogy, you know, but it really talks about that, you know, we need to learn to ride the load that we carrying, and a way to debunk, you know, or to just debunk the you know, the whole thing about what it means to flourish is to understand the model, that the thinking framework that I've put together here is like mature areas of foundational concepts that drives behavior, and it's called the SCANS model. So and what that talks to is that, yeah, you know what, we are, I almost can start at the bottom. We are social first, and I think talking to that, then, you know, there's an order to social development. A lot of us that are highly rational, and, you know, we come into this world, we think, and self-actualization. You know, social cognitive neuroscience teaches us it's actually not about self-actualization, it's about self-transcendence, which I think COVID has put us into almost a pressure cooker to make that happen. But so we are wired socially, and if those needs aren't met, so there's an order to it. You have to bond and belong. Then you can start taking the perspectives of others, and then you can get on well in groups. But often what happens with all of us, I mean, we have a story to tell. Our bonding and belonging wasn't, the quality of it wasn't what it could have been. And therefore, we've got a certain way of behaving in the world. So that pattern of acting in groups under pressure, as we all know, and there's so many tools that show us, you know what, our worst selves comes out, or our shadow side comes out, or the derailers, as some psychometric instruments talk about it. So, you know, I just now spoke about the bottom banner there, but so to learn to write the T-Rex is to really to understand that in any situation, the evolution, something that I think is prevalent at the moment, there is an evolution in order to human development, and to know that under any situation, that, you know, you're going to be either perceiving it as a negative or a positive, and the more you see it as a negative, the more you are going to, you know, in terms of group behavior, people are going to kind of say to you, you know what, how do you shape up or fit into this group? And then learning to write the T-Rex talks about that. It talks about how in a split second, because behavior is, like you say, it's subconscious, but if you can learn how these things work, you can make a choice. You can make a better choice and learn to write the cognitive load that you perceive you have. A lot of these things are, as we know, with stress, and that's why I put stress at the bottom. We all think it's a real thing, but it's a perceived stress. It's perception. And how do we undo that perception so that we can write the T-Rex better? Is that thing about attention. And that's, if I can leave one thing today, it's to teach decision makers what is attention and how do we use it in the corporate world? Because that's a tipping point.
Okay, interesting. So you say attention is an open system. I love that idea that the energy flows wherever your attention goes. I think that's such a it's kind of what I think a lot of people try to call mindfulness. But mindfulness is kind of just feels like you have to put a bunch of things into your mind so that it's empty, or take it out. So I like the way that you put it. It's your energy will go where your attention is focused, and that for me was actually far more powerful than the way that mindfulness often gets explained. So I thought that was beautiful in the book.
Thanks. I want to take back to that slide, maybe, but I mean, I actually want to do the exercise later, but
Okay.
so let me not preempt that. But I mean, one thing that we do know with attention and what takes our attention is this thing that we call arousal. I mean, before attention is arousal of the nervous system,
Oh, of the nervous system.
very nice.
Now I get it. Okay.
Arousal of
Okay.
Yeah. So the nervous system is to the brain as blood is to the heart. You know, you have to understand the nervous system and what feeds neurons and what makes them behave like they do. So in the corporate world, I mean, we don't want to understand all of that. We want to know what in the top right hand corner there, what puts us in the flow state. We can where's the bang for the buck for the person that you employ? And we know that people that have got mindful attention awareness, they sit on the top of that curve. They've got big mental bandwidth because they've got the attention to focus in the moment, to flick into the past, into the future. But the most important thing is they're adaptive, so they can stay in the moment and you make the best decision. It's a cornerstone of adaptive leadership. So this thing called attention, like you rightly said, mindfulness, if you slice it thinly, it's called mindful attention awareness. And how do we adapt that? How do we cultivate that? There's a way to that, and we find, that's why I'm into this work. If you know how the brain works, your trigger to change is just much stronger. So this slide here takes the inverted U curve of performance that we all love, sitting on top of the curve, or the flow state, as Chick sent me, I call it. And it puts a bit of, the part of the brain that's highly responsible for decision making and coping under stress and being nice to each other. And it tells you what happens. If you've got chronic, unpredictable, like we have at the moment, elevated stress, your short-term memory is going to tank in at some point, and your affect, your emotions are just going to ramp up. And it's what Amy Arnston, in a famous article, highly published, called The Neurobiology of Being Frazzled. So how do we reverse that? And that's what, the 7 strategies that I published talks about.
Absolutely. This moderate stress that you talk about, I also learned a new word, eustress, from the book. Tell us about that. It's maybe I don't come across neuroscience often, but that was for me a whole new thought.
So eustress and distress comes from Hans Selye's work. The guy who's the guru, is long gone, but I mean the foundational writings about the 2-gear emotional, the stress response and the relaxation response. Okay. And the eustress is basically, I think, I do know, and the mainstream, it's the flow state where we are our best selves, where we can bring our best to work. And to understand that, we need to know what drives that. And I mean, there's lots of research done on that. I mean, even in our own country, it's published and researched. The work of Etienne, one of your colleagues, published the Neurozone model. There's many such things in the world, self-scoring instruments to help people in the world of work.
So the basic premise there is that moderate stress unlocks a flow state, but if we have constant low stress or constant high stress, that somewhere in there we become frazzled, we lose ourselves. Okay, that's so interesting, and I think a very practical and useful way to think about it.
And I think the big insight for me is that, these neuroscience works best, applied neuroscience, let me say that, that's wrong what I said. Applied neuroscience works best with payoff lines. So we say neutral is the new positive. So don't think that you just have to be positive all along. It's mindful attention awareness is quite a neutral state. But if you're highly negative, then you, again, the balance sheet, need to up the positives to get to neutral. And how do you do that? There's many ways. Perfect. It's not just mindfulness. Okay, so this is just a slide that I thought, so we want to obviously make the red spin in a blue direction where we feel cool and act cool. And this is a meta-analysis that was done, and it talks to what I've also published. I didn't do a meta-analysis. I just did a research study with 250 people on self-scoring instruments. and it confirmed the literature. So we don't have time to talk to all of it, but sleep, exercise, good mood, and social embeddedness, a lovely term, but getting on in the social world and understanding it really. And for me, that's also been one of the big insights with neuroscience, is that we are all so hung up on EQ, but we increasingly know that it's social cognition. If you understand social cognition, then you really have a good armor to lead in the corporate world. And then the one so two things, mindful attention awareness and meaning and purpose is the ones that I really want to touch on before the all is closed.
Yeah, no worries. And I find it so interesting that, top executives that I've met definitely value things like sleep and exercise, and their social capital in the organization. But I find often that kind of mid-level and junior execs think it's exactly the opposite. If you gave them that as a list, they'll give you the antithesis of it. So they'll say, you shouldn't sleep, you must just work, you shouldn't care about what everybody else thinks, just get to the top, etc. So it's interesting that as you mature as an executive, these are things that you have to bring on board to stay effective. And I like the way that you put it as kind of, this is the formula to make sure that it stays at top performance. It is in a peak state, and that you can stay there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's that thing of it's almost, there's a prescription in the world of work, and it says, sleep enough, be nice to others, and do focused planning. But the reality is that that you get a badge for not sleeping too much.
Yes, absolutely.
Why are you so late? We know the story, the backstory that comes off in the world of work. And I think it's to really, for me, I think the lights went on when I saw, that slide that I've just showed you. And I mean, we do an assessment called My Brain Solutions Leadership Assessment, which is a real-time assessment. So it's not a self-report. You can see that under high stress, your working memory goes. So, and what drives high stress? The biggest thing that is poor sleep, negative mood, and high stress are intercorrelated. So it's almost those three things. If you can debunk that for executives, there's a breakthrough, because the highest level of stress receptors is in your hippocampus and your limbic system. And to know that how do you reverse the chemical cocktail in that part of the brain, so that you can have this broad field of view or mental bandwidth, that you can make decisions and be nice to others and innovate at the same time.
I'm fascinated by this concept of positive effect. Thanks for that. I'm sorry. I'm just jumping into the next thing. I'm so fascinated by your topics, and there's just so much information. And for those of you watching and listening, the book is really jam-packed full of all of these little bits of insights, etc. So definitely worth picking it up. I think it's about 200 pages of just like really understanding how stuff works in the brain and how they all connect, and giving you a good framework to think about it and to learn more. Just on your point 3 there, positive effect. The way that I understand it is the way that some people react positively to things, and kind of you get the whole drama and how can I say, almost a kind of social stress around every situation, and that plays out as an effect. And so how does a positive effect kind of work in your mind?
So effect, and I must also say that, there are so many things, and I think one needs to be cautious increasingly in the applied neuroscience field and in the main neuroscience field of words that we use. So effect, all of us would probably know it as mood. How do you develop a positive mood? So one of the world's really controversial neuroscience researchers, she's kind of thrown all of that out of the argument at the moment, but I'll get to that later. But the way I published it is in its classical sense of a positive mood. And what builds a positive mood is so emotion sits under, negative, positive emotions over time can become a mood. So it's more of a overarching kind of state that we say, it's not specific. Am I negative or positive today? And what drives that? And we find increasingly it's again the body keeps the score. Do you have the body budget? You'll be negative if you haven't slept enough. And if you have, it's not just sleep. I'm just not saying, I'm not saying sleep your way to the top. That's not what I'm saying.
Wow. It will help.
It will help. Amy Arnstein shows if you do these things that you really go to the top. But it's so positive effect is a state of mood that you can I can't say manipulate, but you can build it. You can take charge of it. And so I think increasingly, Leon, also I want to put that on the table. I am a psychologist, but increasingly we find that, DSM manuals and clinical assessment of people, would start looking at what the brain scans say, what the QEEGs say, and you'll find there's a lot more. There's a lot of complementary information to say. A person that's got negative effect might just not have enough omega-3s in his diet, or it's increasingly become an integrative science rather than a manual of disorders.
And that's what struck me throughout the book is, it's actually about simple things. It's about eating right, exercising, sleeping, having good, positive social relations, building the mood, as you say, and getting kind of that into a positive spiral that you've mapped out very, very nicely. And also forgetting, the remembering to practice this, to keep going is cool. But anyway, so sorry, I'm like rambling here. I really enjoyed kind of realizing that there is these little things that we all can do that will make a big difference. And as you say, like even basic things like omega acids and etc. Without being faddish about it, looking at it in a balanced way, we can actually make a big difference in your daily kind of quality of life.
Yeah, the whole thing about brain gut interaction. I mean, I think 3 years ago somebody told you, that the biggest generator of serotonin would be in your gut. You'll think, they had too much something of the good stuff. But increasingly we know, go fix your diet and you'll see huge transformation in your behavior. So, and I mean, there is a legitimate field called integrative medicine. So, yeah.
There was a big word, something like somatropes or something that you talked about on the things that's in your gut that signals your brain. So, and from what I understood from what you said, it is there's a very direct link between it sends signals to the brain of this is what's happening to you, and so now. What's your professional opinion on eating too much during COVID? What would have it told my brain?
Well, I mean, I think we can go heavy on that and say that you were in extreme shock and therefore you had shut down. But if you drank your green juice, you would have been good. So if you knew about it, just have 2 shots of green juice every day, you would be good. And another thing, I mean, I always find with people that I also coach, this whole thing of people feeling anxious. I'm not a neuronutritionist, so there's a field called neuronutrition, neuroscience of nutrition, and it's powerful. But it talks simply about, being hydrated. Because if the brain doesn't have water, it gets anxious, and you start shaking, and you think, it's my low EQ or IQ or interpersonal anxiety. But meanwhile, you're not well nourished. You've got an undernourished brain. But I'll stop there. I mean, I don't have the. I'm just talking about mature sciences that I've published.
Excellent. Great. Yes, and I'm fascinated by your analysis of emotion. You had a whole chapter on that, and I think it's a huge topic because it's. I think we all misunderstand emotion.
Yeah.
And I found the way that you kind of approach it very interesting. What do you want to tell us about that? Because I love
Yeah.
the world of emotion.
You know what? I think for me, well, and I must be honest with you, I published both because I was so attached on how I was, my professional training and my lifelong understanding of it that I couldn't, and I don't think it's, it's the one or the other, but increasingly we know that emotions are not, so the triune brain theory that we all know very well, and to say that, what emotions are hardwired into us, and under stress, we have I taught my children, you're either glad, mad, bad, or sad, to teach them some emotional labeling. Increasingly, we know that emotions are socially constructed, and um, so it's the kind of universal view versus the constructivist view, and so your brain is not a layer, an onion with a tiny dinosaur in the middle, with the bottom. I mean, it's a metaphor. It's a way to explain it. Increasingly, we know that the brain consists of large-scale networks, and that the whole thing of emotion is socially constructed. And our way around that is to understand that we need to. So typically what we used to think is that, I can read your face, and there's tests on it. I mean, if you look at Ekman, I published it and I've done a few Ekman assessments, and it's rigorous. But increasingly we know that you need context to interpret, a glance or a smile on a face or whatever. And because when we know each other well, we can do that, but you can't walk into a boardroom and with a new employee look and see that he didn't really smile with his eyes, or his eyes didn't really shine, and therefore make a conclusion that this person can't be trusted. So and it's called emotional, in the mainstream we call it emotional granularity. So start really being aware that you need to have a big vocabulary, and that's what we increasingly say. Teach your executives, develop that vocabulary, develop new words at the age of 60 or whatever, and teach your children more words, because the more words we've got to express how we feel, the better grip we've got on breaking emotions. Instead of saying, there are 7 universal emotions, as Ekman published, and I mean, it helps us to get out of the starting blocks, but it can be very limiting to say we're going to employ people on those 7, emotions and the test that goes with it. It's much more complex than that, and I think it holds us back. Another thing that constructivist theory talks about is this whole thing of its concepts, and how do the concepts play out? Is that and I think what talks at the moment why a lot of us are feeling maybe we've got this brain fog, or not emotionally not where we could be, is because we don't have language to explain what's going on. And you'll see that, I mean, there's new terms coming out to explain to us, maybe mimes even, that we laugh about and so forth, to explain what's going on with us. And I think that is all for the good. So I think the takeout for me of constructivist theory is that emotions are socially constructed, and be careful to jump too quickly to label somebody. We call it emotional labeling. And the other thing is then also the body budget comes in there. If you are very exhausted, so your brain isn't in a relaxed physiological state, you will lean on past experiences to predict what to happen. But if you do a lot of attention awareness exercises, the brain is relaxed. So it's got that purposeful pause, as we know from existential psychology, to choose something different. Okay. In the moment, and so it doesn't make a prediction error, because that's also what happens. We judge a situation, but we judge it wrong if we're tired, underslept, or super stressed.
Yeah, and I found that interesting, because I think I might have been kind of a behavioralist thinker, to say, like, this was pre-wired. A lot of emotions aren't useful because they tell you kind of something very primitive, like yeah, somebody's looking at you wrong, so now you think that they're attacking. Well, we just live in a much more diverse and cultural society, culturally complex society, that those signals can be easily misinterpreted. So I like the fact that you're saying kind of we're moving from a base behavioral kind of primitive mind concept of emotion to a socially constructed one, in which it's actually the people that I know, and getting to know them tells me what they are, and I can't let emotion be the judge. And I see that playing out so many times, where people meet a person once and they make a snap judgment, and then later when they actually have to do business with them, they have to actually get to know the person on the other side. And then I was recently in a situation where there was a big deal that hinged on somebody just having observed somebody at a distance, made a totally incorrect judgment, and it nearly stopped a massive deal. So it's a very, very practical kind of thing in a business context.
Absolutely.
Okay. Cool. You said that you have some exercise that you want us to do today, so tell us about that.
So talking into emotion, so that we are in the book we published 7 strategies, and we've touched on all of them, but the one that we know that even drives emotion, because it's the split second that you perceive something that makes you go down the rabbit hole or not. So this is wonderful work published by, and that's what the exercise that I want to do. It's published by a highly regarded and published neuroscience called Norman Farb, and he said, you know what is, so in all of this that we've discussed this morning, what is your superpower, executive or decision maker or mom or whoever you are? And we realized, he said, you know what, it's about self-referencing and understanding what is self-referencing. So I just love that slide, because it really talks about density and how we get it wrong, and then emotionally we lean on the past, or we escape to the future. So he basically says, you know what, there's 2 ways of experiencing the world: the direct mode versus the story mode. And the direct mode is the here and now. That's where the mental bandwidth sits. The story mode, the narrative, which we talk to ourselves, is where a lot of our problems come from. And it really is, and we need it. I mean, nothing, and we know in brain science, the brain is, it doesn't, it's, what's the word? It's very prudent about how it spends energy. So nothing would be there if it didn't serve. So we need the story mode. We need to, the story is the memory systems and the emotions, and obviously the whole brain, but specifically the memory. What did we do in the past, and what are we going to do in the future? And we typically, flick over into the past. We have guilt and shame, elaborative narrative focus, as it says there, or we project into the future, fantasy or fear maybe at the moment, and then we lose out on the present. So the present is then where the power lies. That's talk about being adaptive in COVID. That is the cornerstone of adaptive leadership. To see why? Because it helps us see reality as it is. Because what we typically do, we see reality as we don't want it to be, or as we want it to be, depending on if we positive or negatively motivated, versus as it is. And mindful attention awareness, which I want to give you a thin slice into that, gives us that broad field of view in the moment. So he said, it's all at the bottom there. It's a wonderful, wonderful body of work, and it's about being adaptive. So the exercise then is the following, and it's a 3-minute exercise, and I always talk too much because I love it, but I'm going to just do 2 minutes of the actual exercise. But so this is I love this payoff line. It's about Daniel Kahneman, and he says, odd as it may seem, I am my remembering self, and the experiencing self who does all my living is a stranger to me. So the exercise then is that, and why we love it, it talks to, so are you ready, people on the call? It is about paying attention in the current present tense, in the current mode, in the experiential mode, we call it. So I want to encourage you to close your eyes and sit, what we call sit in integrity, and for a quick mindfulness exercise. So we're not going to make you Buddha at work, but you sit with your feet flat on the floor so that you're grounded, and you close your eyes and you relax your tongue beneath your bottom teeth, and then you just do the following exercise. So it's a neuroscience reflective exercise, and it merges what we know as a mindful attention awareness with some brain principles. So, and it says the following. It says, if you want to maximize your present tense awareness, pay attention to how you're breathing, because breath is the manual override for a highly taxed nervous system. And then it talks about taking in sensory data. So the senses versus processing data works to different parts in the brain. The senses is the direct mode. I can only sense how I feel on this chair right now. I can't do it tomorrow. I can only sense the temperature of the room right here, right now, in the room, or the feeling of the clothes against my body, not tomorrow or yesterday. And it's tapping into that senses and taking in sensory data relaxes that part of the brain that has to be present in the right here, right now. So, and in the story mode, where the idea pops into your head and you run with it, that's then where you lean into past concepts, or you predict wrongly into future concepts, and your mood changes. So let's do the exercise. So you sit on your chair, and I'm going to stop talking. I just wanted to prime you what's happening. And you start breathing in through your nose and out through your nose. We call it the two divine straws. In through the nose and out through the nose. And you take in the sensory data. So sensory data is the sound around you, maybe the sound of your PC buzzing, the feeling of the clothes on your body, and the oxygen going in and out through your nose. The background sounds maybe of your family or of your dog or whatever's going on for you right here, right now. And all that you do is you take sensory data in. And when your mind wants to take control and make a story of it, you let it go and you come back to nose breathing. And for 2 minutes, we're going to do this, and then you'll see the change in your arousal. Place is here and the time is now. And you'll feel the drool reflex kicking in when you have to maybe feel a tear in your eye, or some saliva in your mouth. And that's the sympathetic nervous system kicking in and reversing the cortisol and the noradrenaline out of your midbrain and flooding it with good oxygenated blood, and with serotonin and many neurotransmitters that's very highly related to relaxation. And as the mind wanders, you just keep on bringing it back to the present tense through the breath, taking in the sensory data, broadening that field of view, thinking slower. And energy always goes where attention flows. And then you can slowly open your eyes. So that's just a thin slice at mindful attention awareness, and and one typically feels the relaxation response.
Absolutely, I think it's like these little experiences, and that's also what I liked about the book. Is after every section there is little exercises and things that you could do, and just reflections that you can have on that. So that was very nice. It's like it's a little, almost like a little workbook that you can go through and make it your notes and go through it. Yeah, cool. So tell us about this one.
Yeah, so this was just a summary of what you've just experienced, and I think you know, I can't say it's a business case for it, but I mean the business the case is clear that those of us that can slow down repetitively, we call it purposeful pauses, specifically now in, you know, being online all the time. Before you go online, just have a purposeful pause on what we've just done. Take 30 seconds, be aware of your breath. And why is it important? Because the brain, so giving that perceived control, the brain knows, you know, what you take in charge. There's a rhythm to it. And also another thing I think that's very relevant for us at the moment is this whole thing of screen apnea, which mindful attention awareness also helps us kind of stop, because we sit in front of screens the whole day. If I can ask all of us, you know, who of you are you aware, who of us are aware when we sit in front of our screens the whole day about our breath awareness and breath regulation? And I think few of us are. We just literally, screen apnea means we stop breathing, and the more hyperventilating we are and hypervigilant, depending on who's on your stand-up virtual call, you forget to breathe. You breathe too fast and talk too fast. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that was just a debriefing.
Brilliant. Okay. Excellent.
Okay, and this was just this is not in the book, but this is the work that I'm busy with at the moment. But so I'll leave that. But I think maybe, I don't know if there's any questions, but we didn't go through this slide. But this is the kind of the 7 routes, pathways that we've created in the book. That I mean, we did touch on, but we didn't do it sequentially or whatever. But I think number 7, Rian, you started with it, self-transcendence. Or how do you find your focus and your purpose? So we know that, and I think this is a powerful thing for people to get, is that, you know, the quicker that we can realize we are wired, it's called pro-social behavior. If we can understand what do we do here in life and how is it serving others, the brain has got a reason to wake up for every morning. And it's called that, I didn't read there. I still have something important left to do. And if you wake up in the morning and you can say that to your brain, we do it to our companies, but we don't do it to ourselves, and make sure and know how you're going to do it. That's what we call an upward spiral of flourishing. It's called benefit finding. People that knows I've got something important left to do, and whatever comes my way is a benefit for me to achieve that. It's counterintuitive, actually. They flourish upwards. They spiral upwards, and it's called flourishing. Yeah.
So we've got a question here around perhaps explaining how, and particularly how we can use the state to, and how can it become a trait? So can our kind of the fact that we are in a state of flow, our ability to deal with stress and this kind of positive spiral can become a trait more than a kind of just an experience?
Yeah, so we do know that from flourishing work, you know, the work of Seligman, you know, so people that have positivity, engagement, meaning and relatedness, they over time, you can measure it. So yeah, but how does it become it? It becomes it develops through continuous practice. I think the one that is being measured not acutely, but quite well at the moment is attention, mindful attention awareness as a state versus mindful attention awareness as a trait. Yes, so mindful attention can become a trait, but it's like going to gym. You're not going to have a fit body unless you put in the time. So in talking inspiringly and maybe academically informed about attention awareness, I ain't going to do it to you. You have to stick to the formula. And again, there's many formulas. I mean, the Buddhist, the Eastern philosophies will say to you, you've got to do mindfulness-based stress reduction, or you've got to do mindfulness-based cognitive therapy.
Yeah.
But you can measure it, yeah. So it's building a habit. It's putting in, I lie. It's not the outlier rule of 10,000 hours, but yeah, so you can
Yeah,
become a trait.
no, but even that, I mean, and that's what I like about what you're saying is that, if you're going into a state where you write down your goals, you reflect on them daily, you live them, that you will, what would have started out as hope becomes being not hopeful in nature, but transcending that to some extent through mindfulness, and you're getting to a point where you're taking the micro behaviors, the regulation of emotions, everything works towards getting to the point where you achieve that end state, because your psychological capital says, well, I'm here, I've got something to do, and every time you look up, it's that affirmation that you wrote down, or it's that thing that you're reminding yourself why you're here, or you're living your purpose. I think that's, for example, possibly why it's so effective to write down your goals and vision boards and all of those things. It reminds people that that's why I'm here. That it puts this whole system into production, and creates flow in it.
So it's called, I love that. It's called, I like this word as well. It's called attention density. So how do we build that attention density? So we know that the payoff line is what you think about and think about comes about. So what does that mean? Thinking about is what you've just said. I've got goals, I work it. Gratitude is one of the huge constructs that's being researched in positive neuroscience. And we know that people that show gratitude, and if you think of it, operationalizing the neuroscience of gratitude, if you are in a state of grace, if you're grateful, you don't want anything to change. So your emotions aren't volatile. You don't say to yourself, "Oh, I wish it was like that," or "I could have been." I could have been. So thinking and thanking is core of part of flourishing. It's part of benefit finding.
Cool. Ingra, I'm going to think about it, and I'm going to thank you. Sure, it's really been a very, very interesting session. So people should go out and buy the book. We will provide a link online for that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in there. I think it's definitely worth time understanding better how you work, how your body works. We've also got a course that builds on this. Also, I'm sure if anybody needs Ingra's details, we can connect you with her. And you do some of this work in your practice as well. And yeah, we would love to have everybody go out there and find out a little bit more about how to flourish, and not just fight or flight. So thank you so much to our audience as well for joining today. And it was genuinely informative, and look out for the recording. And we will see you at the next Executive Book Club. Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Rian. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Ingra. Okay, that was stunning. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.